Scott has been a developer for 30 years and he's been blogging at Hanselman.com for the last 20. He works in open source on .NET and the Azure cloud for Microsoft out of his home office in Portland, Oregon. Scott has been podcasting for over 850 episodes at hanselminutes.com for over 17 years and over 700 episodes at azurefriday.com. He's written a number of technical books and spoken in person to over 1 million developers worldwide. In Scott's words, he's also on TikTok, which was very likely a huge mistake. The title of his talk, Mentorship versus Sponsorship, Growing the Next Generation of Inclusive Engineers via Systems Thinking and Stories. Please give a large pink stage welcome to Mr. Scott Hanselman.
Hello, hello. Thank you so much for having me here. I hope you can hear me okay. Good deal. All right. Well, so what I heard from that intro is that I'm a super old programmer and I'm still here. And my goal is to make more super old programmers. And the reason that I say that is that I think it's interesting to point out that one of the reasons that I'm now 31 years into tech is I didn't leave. I didn't give up, but I also wasn't pushed out by trolls or jerks. I stuck with it. And I also had a place to fail and to succeed. I had a place to learn, and I had supportive bosses along the way. Now, right off the bat, I was told by our friends at Craft that this is an inappropriate font and not a very nice looking slide. So I had to immediately upgrade my fonts because a lot of the talks at the conference here are very professional, very nice. So no Comic Sans. But then I was told that the background, the white background, is not very nice. I needed some evocative stock photography. So I found a photograph here of a typical programmer's desk. I think we can all agree as developers and as creatives that this is what a real typical computer person's desk looks like, wouldn't you say? Actually, someone else told me that maybe this was a more typical programmer's desk. And someone at work told me that's what a real programmer's desks look like. And I laughed because it's a funny joke, but I also kind of went for a second and I said, yeah, but when you say real programmer, now you're setting up a little gate and you're saying that's what a programmer's desk looks like, and maybe that's what a person who lives in Photoshop's desk looks like. But I have seen programmers' desks like that on TikTok and on social media because some people want a clean workspace. And I've seen desks like that because I've taken that photograph and I know what that desk looks like. The point I'm making is that while it's funny to say that's what a programmer's desk looks like, when we say stuff like that, we may not be as welcoming as we want to be. A programmer's desk looks like whatever your desk looks like. We want everyone to feel welcome when they are joining tech. And that's what this talk is about. It's about the things that we don't talk about, like attitude and style and how people feel when they start working in tech. During the pandemic, I saw a lot of what I call hustle culture and a lot of programmers saying that, the pandemic's happening, you're stuck at home. If you didn't learn JavaScript during the pandemic, then what are you even doing, bro? You got to learn crypto, you got to learn blockchain, and then you're going to be a programmer. And someone else was like, if you don't learn Chinese during the pandemic, then you were just wasting time. But I don't know about you, as I was sleeping a lot, I was freaking out. There was a lot during the pandemic. I think if you survive the pandemic, you're doing a great job. I don't think that anyone should set any goals as to what you should or shouldn't have accomplished during that time. I want people to feel welcome in tech. And in fact, this is one of my favorite magazines from 1984 when I was learning how to code, where this young lady is on the cover of a computer enthusiast magazine. We don't see magazines very much, and we certainly don't see young women on the cover of them like this. She's got her bubble gum, she's got her glasses, she's got her TI-89, and she's even got her modem and her mouse here. She's learning how to code. And I think that's really cool. Now, there are some quotes that talk about diversity in tech. And one of them is diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. And I think that's a cute quote. It's fun to say, but it's actually not the best quote. This is a better one. Inclusion is being a part of the party planning committee. So I find myself, rather than trying to uh, push diversity to people who may or may not hear it, I try to push inclusion because inclusion creates natural diversity. Inclusion is literally not excluding people. In fact, I was on a work business trip yesterday, and one of my invisible disabilities is that I'm a type 1 diabetic. So I have an implanted sensor. I have an implanted insulin pump. I even went and made an Xbox avatar so that other kids and people could see these implants as well on themselves because being visible is important. And one of the people on the trip had a child who was a type 1 diabetic and had no idea that that was something that I struggled with. And I was dealing with time zones and lack of sleep for this business trip. And that reminded this parent, this person who was on the business trip with me, that their kid could do that. So the simple act of me existing gave them a small moment of like, oh wow, I guess my kid could do your job. And that matters whether it's something like diabetes or an artificial leg, or whether it's gender or color or age. When you see someone who looks like you doing a thing, then you go, hey, I can do that thing too. And that's what we want everyone to feel like, right? We don't want to hide information from folks, but historically, knowledge has been hoarded. Experts often in a field don't want people to understand what they do because they wouldn't be experts if everyone knew how to do it. And unfortunately, in tech, we see people putting the non-technical people down. That's a conversation that we have in 2023, but this is actually a quote from a newspaper and a magazine in 1974. So this is not a new concept, rather. And I have called this historically the technology priesthood. And the reason I call it the priesthood is that, you know, thousands of years ago, when religious texts came out, there were the people who could read, and then there were the people who couldn't read. So if you wanted to know how to learn about a religious text or the Bible or something, you'd have to find someone who could read. And they wouldn't let you touch the book. They would read it to you and they would interpret it for you, much like we have done with our parents and our non-technical family members and computers. And we've whether we did it on purpose or not, created a world where there are the technical people who know how stuff works. And then there are oh, I'm not a computer person. I think I broke the computer. I must have done something wrong. And I don't understand why we took this tool and created a technology priesthood around it, because it has created a world where people don't feel comfortable getting into tech because they think it's impossible. They can think it's difficult. And in the process, we have created this concept of this gatekeeper or this decision maker that's controlling the information flow into a system. And that allows folks to decide who gets to be involved. And that's why I call back to me being in tech now over 30 years and remembering that I was welcomed, I was comfortable, and I was excited to be involved, and I never felt unwelcome. And we want everyone to feel like that. So what I've tried to do over the last 30 years is put out good work, not waste my keystrokes or my time. I'll talk a little bit about that later. And then share experiences. And I'm calling on you and encouraging you, as well as your coworkers, your friends, and your family, and the people that you interact with, to share your experiences. Be kind consistently at scale for as many years as you can, hopefully 30 plus, and that energy will come back to you. And then acknowledge that stuff like this hustle culture, you're not working hard enough, you're sleeping, what are you doing, is probably not the way to get work done. And then also remember that, as an example, during the pandemic, remote work is not the same as quarantine work. A lot of us were not having fun at home, but a lot of us, like myself, have always been working remote and are doing okay. But no one should feel that pressure to overwork. The other thing that I really try to preach and try to spread the word about is to be intentional about how you feel when you are working, when you are welcoming someone into tech, because a lot of us are stressed out and spending time doom scrolling. Doom scrolling is when you're on your phone and everything sucks. So you just keep scrolling and there's just more doom and you just scroll for doom. Like the climate's not going to get any better because you're scrolling more on Twitter. So you have to really be deliberate and intentional. So there's this thing called deliberate practice, being intentional and present, being as in the moment as you can. And if you do that over years, you will have more fun. You will hopefully be um, more at peace. This might sound Zen-like, but it's actually more than that. It's trying to be present in the moment at your job so that you learn more, and then being present in the moment with your family and your friends so that you are connecting with them. Okay. So I mentioned at the beginning in the intro, I mentioned that I've been doing this for 30 years. That sounds like an impressive number. Sometimes people, maybe people that you've met at work, will use a number like that and they'll beat you on the head with it. I've been doing this for 20 years or 30 years, or I know more than you. I'm going to be honest. About 7 of those 30 years, I was kind of sleepwalking. I was not present. I was just doing the same work year after year. And that really came to a head during the pandemic because I had felt for a couple of years I hadn't been growing, I hadn't been learning. So I started to think about my space, this space that we're seeing behind me here. And I made a nest. I put things on the shelves that mattered to me. I organized my space and I started thinking deliberately about the times that I was making software, the times that I was being creative, and deciding, am I a morning person? Am I a night person? Am I better before lunch? Am I better after lunch? Those things might be obvious, but a lot of the times we don't ask ourselves those questions. Very rarely does one set up a meeting with oneself and say, I'm going to think about when I'm just at my best. And then can you build a system or build a nest around that so that you might be more successful? And then ask yourself, is this the time to create? These are the kinds of things that we can learn and then teach our early in career and our new developers and creatives that are entering our space, and then encourage them, because a lot of people don't feel like they're experts. Everybody's an expert at something. And the best part is that everyone is an expert at the thing that at their own story. You are an expert in you and how you got there. So I try to encourage early in career and new developers to tell their story when I say you should have a blog, because typically they'll say, well, I don't know anything about .NET, or I don't know anything about Python. I don't know enough to write a blog. They think I'm saying you should be an expert and then tell me about your expertise. I'm saying I want to know who you are and how you are learning. And then that is what I want you to share online. And that's what I have shared over the years. I slowed down during the pandemic because it got really tiring. But if you go to Hanselman.com and hit on /blog, and you go to the categories, I'm just going to scroll. You can just see that I'm spending my time writing on the blog. So people would say, well, how do you have that time? When are you doing this work? Are you doing it, when the kids are asleep? What I'm doing is I'm writing these when there's no email. I don't write email. I write blog posts, and then I send the link in the email. The idea here is that I want to conserve my keystrokes. Why would you want to conserve your keystrokes? It's because you have a finite number of keystrokes left in your hands before you die. That's it. And now that I'm old, I know how many keystrokes I have. I thought I heard someone grunt with sadness in the audience, perhaps. I made a website for you people. You can take a look at it. It's at keysleft.com. If you want to get really morbid and sad, go to Keys Left, and let's say that our host is 29. He types at 80 words a minute. He's got 281 million keystrokes left in his hands before he dies, and those are going down because he's not typing right now. That's assuming that he'll live to be 90, and I can actually see how many tweets he's got left or how many emails to his boss. So the question is, do you want to write long love letters or short emails? Do you want to write novels or computer programs? That's a really intense way to think about how do you want to spend your time. So when he was listing off the blog and the podcast, I realized that talking to cool people, now 893 separate interviews. I'll scroll here as well. That's every Thursday for almost 18 years. I can sleep. This is important. I can go to sleep, and this information, this content lives on. People can listen to this and they can read this. I've even gone and made transcripts so they can search and read over 450 hours of interviews with cool people. I think that's super important because that's an acknowledgement that I am limited, but also allowing the internet to work for me. I don't know the topics. I'm not an expert on these topics. I'm an amateur. But if I want to learn about astrophysics, I will go and find an astrophysicist and have them on the show. There's no professionals, right? People say you have 20 years experience, but is it the same year 20 times? There was a time in my career where I was going through years, year after year, and I wasn't growing, I wasn't expanding, and that was a bummer. But then when I started focusing and being present in the moment and encouraging the people that I mentor to be present in the moment, that really made a difference. Now, I didn't learn Chinese during the pandemic, but over the last 4+ years, my family and I have gone and become black belts in Taekwondo. And I was very proud of this. We did it all as a family, and some of us got ahead of each other, and we coordinated with the dojo to make it so we all became black belts at the same time, and it was very hard. And we are what is called first dan black belts. However, the gentleman who taught us is a ninth dan black belt. So while I was feeling like I had achieved something, I had arrived, I'm a black belt, I want to go and just find someone to beat up. He reminded me that now the work starts. What we had been thinking was multi-step process that ended on step 25, and now we have arrived. After 4.5, 5 years, he's like, okay, now step 0, you're a black belt, and the work starts now. And that's a really cool way to think about your career. I'm 30 years in. We're learning Kubernetes. We're learning new technologies. We're learning AI, right? Things that didn't exist. All my degrees, all the things that I learned, every programming language that I've ever learned has died. I learned how to learn in school. So the black belt is the beginning, not the end. And I try to remember that when I think about this gentleman here. Do we know who this is? Tim Berners-Lee invented the World Wide Web. Look at his title. He didn't put senior web developer, which I think is a very classy move. The other thing that I think is really cool about Tim Berners-Lee that I don't think he gets enough credit for is he could have put the web developer, right? Oh, how nice to meet you. What's your name? I'm Tim Berners-Lee. I'm the web developer. Imagine getting a business card from someone that didn't say senior or principal or staff. It just said the. That would be a flex. That would be pretty awesome. But the web is bigger than even its inventor. He doesn't understand it all. So he's modest and understands that he's probably never too old to get good advice. So while I want to talk to you about how you can mentor people, I also want you to be thinking about how people could mentor you. So I am both a mentee and a mentor. I have people who teach me technology, and then I share what I'm trying to do with those people. So you are never too old to get good advice. But also, if you are an early in career person who's watching this presentation right now, you might think I should find a mentor. You should, but you should also perhaps be a mentor and share your journey and the things that you know. The reason I use that as an example is a lot of technologies, again, didn't exist when I was starting. So I'm learning Kubernetes like everyone else, and I'm learning blockchain like everyone else, and I'm learning AI like everyone else. I might be able to do it faster because I've got all of this experience to build upon, but new tech is new tech. So then when we think about that word mentorship, we want to break that down because a lot of times I was spending time lecturing young people. When I first started mentoring, it was a weekly lecture with an old man. And it would be Oh, hello, I'm old and I know things, and I'm going to tell you about program. And I was a boy in a Commodore 64 and a BBC Micro, and I would lecture the young person for, oh, and then they would say, nice mentorship. And then I would come back the next week and do it again. That's not what it is. I thought that's what it was. It's not. What it is mentors are trying to help the mentee define their dream, know what their strengths are, build their strengths, advise them, and guide them. It's you wanting your mentee to win. This is important. If you're an effective mentor, your mentee will win. They will win at the thing that they want to win at, whether it be getting a promotion or getting more money or learning a technology or finding a new job, whatever it is, you have to want them to win. And they may eclipse you, they may be better than you, and you have to be okay with that. But then I learned this word, sponsorship. Sponsorship is mentorship on steroids. Sponsorship and mentorship are different things. Mentors guide you, advise you. Sponsors spotlight someone. They actively create luck. They actively create luck by bringing people into new spaces. And I use that word create luck very specifically. People think luck is just lucky. How'd you get luck? Well, I worked hard. That's how I made luck. Let's dissect what luck really means. I said before, been in tech for 30 years. Have I worked hard? Absolutely. Has a lot of my success been working hard? Absolutely. Has a lot of my success been luck? Absolutely. Recognizing that two things can be true. I have busted my butt and worked really hard. I have been super lucky and had opportunities been given to me. And it is that combination of opportunity plus being prepared. That's what luck is. That's a great formula. Once you figure that out, you can understand why you're not being lucky. Was I not prepared? An opportunity presented itself, but I wasn't ready for it. That didn't feel very lucky. But hey, you should talk to someone about going to CraftConf. Oh yeah, that's great. I've been studying and I'm ready to go. I'm prepared for this experience, and now I'll go to Craft and I will have this opportunity. What a lucky thing. You meet someone on a bus that works at a company and they go, yeah, we're interviewing. You should come in. I've been practicing interviewing. I'm prepared. An opportunity presents itself. But if you're not ready, it doesn't feel lucky. So this is why this is interesting, because what am I? Old programmer. What do I have? Opportunities. I can create luck by creating opportunities and helping people be prepared. If I meet someone and we connect on LinkedIn, or I get their card or I get their website and I say, this is a really talented person, I wonder if there's an opportunity for them. They could give a talk. They could work on open source. They could go to an interview. How can you create luck? Now, why is this important? Because luck was created for me. Opportunities were given to me. In some instances, I was prepared. In some instances, I was not prepared. And how cool is that, though, that now if we know the formula for luck, we can now be sponsors to people and bring them into new spaces. An example might be, I have a team at Microsoft. And I've got a bunch of people who work for me. They work really hard. If I then take all of their hard work and then I roll it up and present it to the vice president, that's pretty lucky for me. But if I say, Emily, why don't you present that? You worked really hard on that. I bring a person into a room that they would not ordinarily have access to. I introduce them. I do the warm introduction and I back away. And by then putting a spotlight on someone, by giving them an opportunity, by advocating for them, I have created luck. Now, if they're not prepared and they drop the ball, that was a bummer. We'll have to try it again another time. But if they do rise to the occasion, they're not going to think about that. It's not about credit for me. It's about a quiet lifting of someone into a space they are not ordinarily in, and then stepping away so that now they can be seen. If we go back to the show here, notice that my face doesn't appear anywhere. I'm trying to lift up other people and give them spaces, whether they have written a book or talked about something that I think needs a spotlight. So I lend my privilege, which I have unlimited privilege because I'm a visible person in tech, to go and lift somebody up. So the other thing that's important to remember that within the context of mentoring is it's not unlimited. You don't have to do mentoring forever. Sometimes mentoring can be very awkward and you're not sure when it's going to really end. You can set a goal. So I really encourage people when they start mentoring relationships to set goals. What are we trying to do here? Is it just generally hanging out? Well, no, I want to be a senior engineer. I want to learn Python. I want to be the best .NET programmer. I want to write a book. Let's mentor in phases. What is our goal? And remember that it's not a scheduled regular lecture. It's a two-way street. You have to listen to them and move them to that next level. So I want to pause and breathe for a second. I want to tell a couple of quick stories, and then we'll do Q&A as we get towards the end here, because tech stories are how I do my mentorship. Now, my sons say I only have a certain number of stories, and in fact, my 15-year-old has started numbering them. So if I start telling another story, he's like, that's story number 14. You always tell that story. So he's starting to make me feel like I only have like a couple of dozen. But we are the sum of our stories, I guess, right? The boys joke that I'm a Swiss Army knife, which is a stupid little knife that's really not awesome at everything. It's kind of a mediocre pair of scissors, and it's kind of a goofy saw. So none of these tools are really amazing, but I think it's very versatile. I like being a Swiss Army knife. I actually have my Swiss Army knife that I was given by my dad when I was 12 on my desk to remind me about being versatile and being able to do anything. And this is important. I have a Swiss Army knife on my desk to remind me that, but I also have Fabulous Batman. Fabulous Batman is awesome. Let me see if I can show you Fabulous Batman close up. Fabulous Batman is a ballerina. He's Batman. He's a fairy, and he's freaking Batman. And he's got a ninja swords. So that's awesome. I can be Fabulous Batman, right? I can be a Swiss Army knife. I can be interested in more than one thing at a time, and that's super, super cool. But you got to be a good knife. That's the other thing. You have to at least be a good knife. And that means you have to focus on the basics. So when I tell my stories, I focus on these basics. I focus on problem solving, on layering, on composition, putting together large systems, and then patterns, repeated patterns that you've seen before. I think that's super important. So problem solving, for example, is asking yes/no questions at scale. And sometimes the difference between a senior engineer and a junior engineer is that the senior engineer can chop the problem in half very quickly by asking the right yes/no question. So one of the things that I do when I teach high school, when I teach like 14-year-olds, is I go in there and I say, hey, kids, we're going to learn how to program. My toaster is broken. Then I just pause and make it really uncomfortable because I like to make the kids feel cringy. And then they'll go, well, buy a new toaster. No, I want to figure this out. We're not going to be simple thinkers. We're going to be systems thinkers. Let's start thinking about what's going on. Is the power on? And I get the kids thinking because we're debugging. We're doing debugging, active debugging. I want toast. What's the business problem? Toast. What's the technical problem? My toaster doesn't work. So the kids start brainstorming. Well, maybe plug something else in. That's pretty cool. I just want hot bread. Now we're talking about plugging in lamps and stuff. That's cool. Did you blow a fuse? Maybe go into the garage. One young lady was like, well, is the power on at all? Now we're thinking outside the box. Again, think about the distance, how far away hot bread is the power on? And then one young lady yells out, do the neighbors have power? That's systems thinking. That's thinking about the system in which the toaster exists, right? This is the really explicit systems debugging that one would have to do if they wanted to make toast. And then, of course, at this point, they're teenagers. It goes off the rails, and they're asking, maybe there was an EMP and aliens, and there was an attack, and that's why you can't have toasted bread. But you get the idea. Early in career, people Google a lot. They Google with Bing apparently now. But later in career, people can eliminate an entire class of problems by just asking one question. And you bisect the problem space and split it in half. And this can be really, really helpful. And in fact, just as an example, I went and I wrote down all of the different um, things that could go wrong if I were to make a website. And this was just to see like what I had built in. And I came up with this big long list. And in the words of our famous American president Abraham Lincoln, it's always DNS. And on the left-hand side here, we've got just different things that you could check. Different things that you could check. These are all the kind of things that there's no checklist in the world. This is just stuff you can only learn by keeping a website running. So then I thought to myself, how did I learn all this stuff? I learned by doing. And you learn these things through experience. So if you want to be a senior developer, you have to give your junior developers space to make these mistakes and learn these things. I don't want anyone to memorize that list. I want them to live that list and have those things happen. So I need them to have a space at my job, at my company, where they can fail comfortably without maybe dropping production, but also know when it's not that. My children snuck in, it's never twins. It's never twins. In Sherlock Holmes' world, Sherlock Holmes is always solving mysteries, and there's usually some young bride who killed her husband, and then they accuse her, and then it turns out that she has an alibi. She was on the other side of town, and during the murder, and then Watson's like, could it have been twins? And he says, no, it's never twins. It's just one of those things that and that's kind of how it feels like when you're talking to a senior engineer. They have reasons why it's twins or it's never twins. Then when you layer things, layering is hiding complexity. Layering is really lying. It's just layers of abstraction. I thought it was really funny recently where I realized that I'd been sending email all my life, but never really looked at the protocol. Did you realize that the protocol for email is just name value pairs? You see this multi-part boundary on line 13. And then when I was doing some HTTP posts, it's just name value pairs with boundaries. I just never put that together. We all have posted an HTML form, and most of us have spent time in Postman, but I never realized how sending an email and posting a form were effectively the same thing. So I realized that maybe I already knew that. It's all just the internet traffic. So that hard drive on the left is just encoded information that's spinning on a circle, just like the record player on the right, which has encoded data spinning in a circle. It's all the same thing. Those kind of stories and explanations can help early in career people attach all the neurons in their brains. I'll tell you one other quick story before we get to a little bit of Q&A. This gentleman right here was in a TV show called Altered Carbon. And in this case, his name is Chris Connor. He is a character actor, and he's playing Edgar Allan Poe. And the show was really cool because he played an AI that was a hotel. So the good guy runs into the hotel for shelter, and the hotel is this hologram in the form of Edgar Allan Poe. And I'm a huge fan of the show, so I tweeted, not the super famous guy, because he's not going to tweet me. I decided to tweet Chris Connor, and I said, hey, I thought you were really great on the show. Turns out he lives in Portland. So shoot your shot, right? You're going to miss all the shots you don't take. So I said, would you like to have tacos? And we totally went for tacos, and we hung out, and we did a podcast, and it was amazing. It was the coolest. So then I go back home after the podcast to get the file off the SD card. And I open the thing in Windows Explorer, and this is what I find. What I find was an infinitely recursing series of empty folders. So at this point, I have no choice but to move. I'm going to have to block his number. It can never, our bromance will never happen. I'm not going to be friends with this guy. And what am I going to do? Call him and say, hey, remember that amazing afternoon we spent talking over tacos? Can we just do that again and see if the same magic happens? So I had no other choice either to move house pull my kids out of school, have my wife quit her job and leave the country, or decide to learn how FAT32 works and take apart the bits of the SD card step by step by step to figure out exactly what was going on. So I spent a week learning how file allocation systems work. And then I find zeroed out bytes inside of this disk and rebuild the file allocation table manually, find the files, publish the podcast, and now Chris and I are friends and we hang out all the time. Does that mean I'm a great programmer? Does that mean I'm some low-level super genius? I make web pages. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I know the computer lies to me. So I was able to take my skills debugging at the applications level, and I started walking through the lies the computer tells. And I started learning about how this stuff works. Just because you know how to drive an automatic doesn't mean that you can't learn to drive a manual shift car. It doesn't mean you can't learn to build your own car. So I want early in career people, many of which are coming in at a very high level, calling themselves prompt engineers, to maybe learn to drive a stick shift. Being able to do that is really explicit power. And being able to do that was super important for me. Otherwise, I would not have been friends with that gentleman and I would be completely screwed. And all of that comes back to this idea of if you're a senior engineer, if you're later in career, most problems are, yeah, I've seen that before. That looks familiar. I've been there before. I'm going to skip past a couple of these pictures of typewriters because I'm going to get to the end, blah, blah, blah. Here's your homework, my friends. I want you to think about your stories, how they can be told in a way that is encouraging and uplifting to your mentees. What are your stories doing to humanize tech? And then I want you to help your mentees, and if you don't have any, go get some, share their own stories. And I know that everyone is having a great time at the conference. I want to just say that I am very, very glad that you're here, and thank you so much for letting me do this remotely. And I think we have about 6 minutes left for any questions. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, Scott. Let's give him a big round of applause first. Scott, we have a few minutes for questions, and we have them coming in on Slido, so I'm going to read the questions to you. But first, let me say thank you so much for that talk, and that ballerina fairy Batman with the ninja swords will be forever in our hearts and minds from this day forward on behalf of everyone here. So, Scott, are you ready for a couple questions?
Let's do it.
So the first question is, how can you make the environment work for you? This is a question by Anonymous.
How can you make the environment work for you?
Yeah.
Well, we have to assume that the bosses are open for suggestions, right? When I started being a manager, I realized that I would just have these one-on-ones, these basic manager one-on-ones with people where I would check in and see how they were doing. But I never, ever asked them how they want to be managed. Think about that. Like, how do you want to be managed? And I found out a lot of things. When I finally did that, I went and I asked my employees, do you want to be texted? Do you want to use WhatsApp? Do you want to use Teams? Do you prefer email? Do you prefer documents? And I made a list of all the people who worked for me and the things that explicitly didn't work for them. I have people who don't want to install Outlook on their phone because they don't want it to like interfere with their work-life balance. I have other ones that are like, yeah, text me whenever. That's me as a manager asking them. But at the same time, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, so it's a two-way street. I also needed them to be honest with me and tell me what works for them. I have people who are late workers, like they come in at 10 and they work late. I have others that are early workers, and by noon, they've already been up 8 hours and they're gone. So asking them how it works and applying the same things that I tried to share in this presentation about deliberate practice. How can I help them make a nest? So you have to tell your bosses what works for you. And keep in mind that if your boss calls you at 2 a.m. on a Saturday and you answer the phone, you have taught your boss that that works for you, and they're going to do it again. So while I realize it's complicated and we all need our jobs, you have to express what works and what doesn't and try to find a compromise and build an environment that works for you as a manager and works for you as an employee.
Awesome. Thank you. We have time for one more question, maybe two. How much has the number of keystrokes decreased by using ChatGPT?
The thing about, man, that's a whole other talk. Keep in mind that if I say to you, let's just say, it's a beautiful day, we should go to the, what do you say?
Park?
I was going to say beach.
We
I
heard
asked
beach.
my son,
Yes.
he said movie, someone else yelled something else out. That's what ChatGPT is doing. So then the question is now, was beach the right answer or was park the right answer? It's just statistics. It's not smart. It's not an artificial general intelligence. It's guessing what the next word is based on context. Now, if I had said something during my entire talk about my love of the beach, it's very likely that you would have had that context in your subconscious and you would have said beach instead of park. That's what ChatGPT is doing. It's a million monkeys with a million typewriters typing a million things, and the ones that sound plausible, they pop out and we go, that's a thing. The problem is, and by the way, it's 7 a.m, so I don't have my socks on. So I'm going to take my socks. And I saw someone who was upset because they thought that ChatGPT was becoming sentient. Like it's going to take over. It's become a smart thing. ChatGPT is a sock puppet. You're alive. I'm alive. What have I done? Am I now afraid of the sock puppet that I have just told that is alive? You're going to take over the world, and here's how. I'm taking over the world. It's you. You're talking to your own sock puppet. So, yes, I'm concerned about AI. I'm not concerned about AI taking over my job. I'm not concerned about AI giving me more or less keystrokes. I'm concerned about it taking jobs away from people who deserve jobs. But no, ChatGPT has not allowed me to do a lot more. It's pretty good at summarizing text, but I'm not a huge fan of it for generating text because it's just generating statistically what it thinks the most reasonable text is. But I think it is great for summarizing meetings so far. We'll see. But if AI does all the work, if that doesn't give us Star Trek: The Next Generation where we can do whatever and just hang out, like if I'm still working 40 hours a week, we did it wrong.
Scott, I wish we had all evening to listen to you talk, but unfortunately, we have to stop it there. We're going to throw this in the post for you. It's a Budapest notebook, and we have an artist rendering of you just for you for your ego wall. So
look at that hair. Look at the beautiful hair on that. I want that right away.
Expect that in the mail sometime in the next month or so. And with that, please give one more huge round of applause for Scott Hanselman.